What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors reaches his breaking point on live television? Tonight we're diving into the shocking moment that left audiences stunned and social media exploding. When Paul Rudd, the man who's charmed us for decades with his wit and warmth, finally had enough of what he saw as deliberate provocation and disrespect. This wasn't your typical late-night television banter. This was something much darker, much more personal, and it ended with one of the most dramatic walkouts in recent television history. Us. If you want to see how quickly things can spiral out of control when egos clash and respect goes out the window, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story is going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about late-night television. What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors reaches his breaking point on live television? Tonight we're diving into the shocking moment that left audiences stunned and social media exploding. When Paul Rudd, the man who's charmed us for decades with his wit and warmth, finally had enough of what he saw as deliberate provocation and disrespect. This wasn't your typical late-night television banter. This was something much darker, much more personal, and it ended with one of the most dramatic walkouts in recent television history. Us. If you want to see how quickly things can spiral out of control when egos clash and respect goes out the window, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story is going to leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about late-night television. The atmosphere in the studio that evening felt different from the moment Paul Rudd walked onto the set. Stephen Colbert, sitting behind his desk with that familiar smirk, seemed more aggressive than usual, his energy carrying an edge that longtime viewers might have recognized as trouble brewing. Paul, ever the professional, settled into the guest chair with his characteristic, easy smile, but even he couldn't have anticipated what was about to unfold. Paul Rudd. Everybody, Stephen announced to the audience, his voice carrying just a hint of something that wasn't quite enthusiasm. The man who somehow convinced Hollywood he's leading man material, despite looking like he should be selling insurance in Kansas. The audience laughed, but Paul's smile flickered for just a moment. It was the kind of joke that walked the line between playful roasting and genuine meanness, and Paul, who had been doing press tours for over 2 decades, knew the difference. "Well, Stephen, I actually did sell insurance before I got into acting," Paul replied smoothly, trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "And I was pretty good at it, so thanks for the career advice." But Stephen wasn't finished. "Speaking of career advice, I have to ask about your latest movie. I watched it last night, and I kept thinking, this is the kind of film that makes you wonder if streaming services are just money laundering operations at this point." The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Even the usually reliable audience seemed unsure whether they should laugh. Paul's jaw tightened slightly, though he maintained his composure. "That's an interesting take," Paul said carefully. "What specifically didn't work for you?" "Oh, where do I start?" Stephen leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "The plot made no sense. Your character had zero motivation, and honestly, watching you try to carry dramatic scenes was like watching someone try to perform surgery with oven mitts." Paul blinked, clearly taken aback by the viciousness of the attack. "Stephen, I have to say, this feels pretty different from the pre-interview conversation we had. Are you okay tonight?" "I'm fine, Paul. I'm just being honest. Isn't that what good interviews are supposed to be about? Honesty?" Stephen's voice had taken on a condescending tone that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "There's honest, and then there's just being cruel for the sake of it," Paul replied, his voice still measured but with a growing edge. "We've known each other for years. I've been on your show multiple times. This isn't honest. This is something else entirely." Stephen shrugged, seemingly unbothered by Paul's growing discomfort. "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending that mediocre work deserves praise because someone's likable in person. Your movie is forgettable at best, and someone needs to say it. Actually, no one needs to say that, Paul shot back, his famous calm finally beginning to crack. Especially not like this, on television, when you know I'm here to promote something I worked incredibly hard on. What's your endgame here, Stephen? What are you trying to accomplish? The host leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with something that looked disturbingly like pleasure. I'm trying to have a real conversation instead of the usual promotional nonsense where I pretend your latest project is revolutionary cinema. A real conversation? Paul's voice rose slightly. This isn't a conversation. This is you using your boss platform to be needlessly nasty to someone who's supposed to be your guest. There's nothing real about this, Stephen. This is just cruel. Stephen's expression shifted into something that resembled mock concern, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Paul, 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 he said, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a difficult child. You're being awfully sensitive tonight. I thought someone with your experience could handle a little constructive criticism. Constructive? Paul laughed, but there was no humor in it. There's nothing constructive about what you're doing. You're not offering feedback or insights. You're just being deliberately hurtful. And calling it constructive doesn't make it any less nasty. The audience had gone completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something far removed from typical late-night entertainment. Several people in the front row looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as the tension between the two men became increasingly palpable. You know what I think this is really about? Stephen continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Paul's hands clench slightly on the arms of his chair. I think you've gotten so used to everyone telling you how wonderful you are that you can't handle it when someone doesn't play along with the Paul Rudd charm offensive. The Paul Rudd charm offensive? Paul repeated, his voice incredulous. Stephen, what has gotten into you tonight? Seriously, what's happening here? Because this isn't the person I've known for years, and it's certainly not the professional I thought I was sitting down with. Stephen waved his hand dismissively. Oh, spare me the wounded act. You Hollywood types are all the same. You can dish it out when you're playing characters who mock regular people, but the moment someone turns the tables, suddenly you're the victim. When have I ever mocked regular people? Paul demanded, his composure finally beginning to slip in earnest. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. And you know it. You're creating this narrative that has nothing to do with reality. Really? Because I've seen your interviews over the years, Paul. All those little jokes about how weird your fans are, how strange it is when people recognize you at the grocery store. Always delivered with that folksy aw shucks routine. But the message is clear. You think you're better than the people who made you famous. Paul stared at Stephen for a long moment, his mouth slightly open, in disbelief. That is absolutely not true, and I think you know it. Those stories aren't about mocking anyone. They're about sharing the surreal experience of being recognized. There's a huge difference between finding something amusing and looking down on people. Is there, though? Stephen pressed, clearly enjoying Paul's discomfort. Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent years cultivating this image of being the everyman actor while simultaneously making it clear that you think the everyman is beneath you. That's complete nonsense, Paul said, his voice getting louder despite his obvious efforts to control it. And honestly, Stephen, even if that were true, which it absolutely isn't, what does that have to do with you ambushing me on your show? What does that have to do with you being unnecessarily cruel about my work? Stephen leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It has everything to do with it, Paul, because I'm tired of watching you, and actors like you get away with this fake humility routine while you look down your noses at everyone else. Someone needs to call it out. You're not calling anything out, Paul said, his frustration now clearly visible. You're just being mean for the sake of being mean. And you're doing it to someone who came here as your guest, someone who supported your show, someone who thought he was your friend. Friend? Stephen laughed, and the sound was genuinely unpleasant. Paul, we're not friends. We're colleagues at best. You come on my show to sell your movies, I give you a platform to do it. That's the extent of our relationship. Don't confuse professional courtesy with friendship. The words hit Paul like a physical blow. His face went pale, and for a moment he seemed genuinely speechless. Wow, he finally managed. Okay, well, at least now I know where we stand. Good, Stephen said, seemingly oblivious to how his words had affected Paul. Now that we've cleared that up, let's talk about your next project. I understand you're attached to another comedy where you play basically the same character you always play. Are you ever going to challenge yourself as an actor, or are you just going to coast on being generically likable until you retire? Paul sat in stunned silence for several seconds, clearly processing not just the question, but everything that had led up to it. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but steady. You know what, Stephen? I don't think I'm going to answer that question. Oh, come on, Paul. Don't be like that. We're just having a conversation. No, we're not, Paul said, his voice growing stronger. A conversation requires mutual respect. It requires both people to be operating in good faith. What you're doing isn't conversation. It's public humiliation disguised as interview technique. Stephen's smile faltered slightly, perhaps sensing that he was losing control of the situation. I think you're being a little dramatic, don't you? Dramatic? Paul's voice rose again. Stephen, you've spent the last 10 minutes attacking my work, questioning my character, and dismissing our entire professional relationship. And when I push back, you call me dramatic? That's rich. The host tried to regain his footing. Look, Paul, if you can't handle a little heat, maybe late-night television isn't for you. This is how real interviews work. This isn't how real interviews work. Paul shot back immediately. Real interviews involve preparation, respect, and genuine curiosity about your guest. What you're doing is something else entirely, and we both know it. Stephen's mask of professional composure was beginning to slip, revealing something uglier underneath. You know what your problem is, Paul. You've been coddled by this industry for so long that you think you're entitled to softball questions and glowing reviews. Well, guess what? Not everyone is going to kiss your feet just because you showed up. Paul stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent studio. I never asked anyone to kiss my feet, Stephen. I just expected basic human decency from someone I thought was a professional. Sit down, Paul, Stephen said, his voice taking on a commanding tone that only served to further inflame the situation. We're not done here. Actually, we are, Paul replied, his voice calm but firm. I'm not going to sit here and let you continue to berate me for your own entertainment. Whatever issues you have with me or with actors in general, work them out. With a therapist not on live television, Stephen's face darkened, his carefully constructed television persona cracking completely. You don't get to walk away from this, Paul. You agreed to do this interview, and you're going to finish it. I agreed to do an interview, Paul corrected, his voice steady, despite the obvious anger burning in his eyes. I didn't agree to be your punching bag. There's a difference, though apparently you don't understand that. The audience watched in stunned silence as Paul began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled. Several people in the front row had their phones out, clearly recording what was quickly becoming a historic moment in late-night television. You're making a huge mistake, Stephen said, his voice carrying a threatening undertone that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. You walk off my show, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Paul paused in his microphone removal, turning to look directly at Stephen with an expression of genuine pity. Stephen, everyone who's watching this already knows exactly what kind of person I am. But more importantly, they're seeing exactly what kind of person you are. And that's not my fault. That's yours. Don't you dare lecture me, Stephen snapped, his professional veneer completely gone now. I built this show, I earned this chair, and I don't need some B-list actor telling me how to do my job. B-list? Paul laughed, but it was a sound devoid of any warmth. You know what, Stephen? You're right. I am B-list. I've never pretended to be anything else, but at least I'm not someone who builds his career on tearing other people down for sport. Stephen rose from his chair, his face flushed with anger. You have no idea what you're talking about. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, world leaders. I don't need to tear anyone down because I've already proven myself. Then why are you doing it? Paul asked, his voice cutting through Stephen's bluster. If you're so accomplished, if you're so secure in your success, why are you spending your time trying to humiliate me? What does that accomplish except making you look petty and cruel? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment Stephen seemed genuinely at a loss for words. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. That's what I thought, Paul said quietly, finally succeeding in removing his microphone and placing it carefully on the chair. You know, Stephen, I came here tonight excited to talk about my work, to share some stories, maybe make people laugh. Instead, I got to see who you really are when the cameras are rolling and you think you have all the power. The cameras are always rolling, Paul, Stephen said, his voice hoarse now. And everyone's going to see you walking away like a coward. Paul turned back one final time, his expression sad rather than angry. Let them see. Let them see me walking away from someone who thinks cruelty is entertainment. Let them see me refusing to participate in whatever this was supposed to be. I'm okay with that. He began walking toward the side of the stage, his steps measured and dignified despite the chaos he was leaving behind. Stephen called after him, his voice desperate now. Paul, get back here. We're not finished. But Paul didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the shouting. He simply kept walking, his shoulders straight and his head held high. As he reached the edge of the stage, he paused for just a moment, not looking back, but clearly gathering himself. Good luck with the rest of your show, Stephen, he said without turning around. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. And, with that, Paul Rudd walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio full of shocked audience members and a host who had just learned that even the nicest people in Hollywood have their limits. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Stephen's stunned expression as he realized that his attempt to dominate his guest had backfired spectacularly, leaving him alone on stage with nothing but his own cruelty for company. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of audience members whispering to each other and the mechanical hum of the cameras that had captured every moment of the stunning confrontation. What did you think of this incredible display of dignity under pressure? Have you ever seen someone handle disrespect with such grace while still standing up for themselves? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that show us what people are really made of when they're pushed to their breaking point.